Okay, so today we're going to be talking about estrogen dominance, and this is the first part of the two-part series. We're going to go into a lot of depth today, looking at how estrogen is metabolized in the body and why we might get estrogen dominance, and then we'll look at a few nutritional approaches and lifestyle approaches towards balancing estrogen. So give you enough information for you to go off and start making positive changes to help clear excess estrogen and balance your estrogen levels. But in part two, we're going to zoom into a few specific conditions like fibroids and endometriosis and fibrocystic breast disease and those sort of estrogen dominance condition. But today we're just going to focus on the umbrella terminology and the overall scope of estrogen dominance without going into specific conditions. So that should be covered in the next section. So in today's webinar, we're going to learn about what is estrogen dominance and the estrogen dominant conditions that we may come across, although we won't go into depth due to time. We'll look at the types of estrogen that the body can break down. And we look at how our bile, our liver, our adrenal, our hormones, and our gut, and how they affect estrogen metabolism. We'll then also look at how we can manage estrogen dominance naturally using diets, herbs, and natural approaches. So when we talk about estrogen dominance, a lot of people make the assumption or have an idea that maybe it's caused by having too much estrogen. That's kind of like the first thing people say, oh, it's probably having too much estrogen. Well, actually, it's not about having too much estrogen. It's about having an inadequate ratio of estrogen to progesterone. So if you look at, for example, you could have normal estrogen but low progesterone. That means you have high estrogen ratio to progesterone, which means you've got estrogen dominance. So if you imagine a scale, you've got on one end of the scale, you've got estrogen, on the other end, you've got progesterone. So anything that tips the scale and estrogen becomes high, then compared to progesterone, then you've got estrogen dominance. Does that make sense? So for example, you could have high estrogen and normal progesterone, and that could mean you have estrogen dominant, or you can have lower estrogen and even lower progesterone. So you could be low on, so say if you do hormone testing and it comes out you're low on estrogen, but you're also very low on progesterone, so that means you're still estrogen dominant. Or you can have very high estrogen and obviously low progesterone. So it's really the ratio. We're looking at the ratio between estrogen to progesterone, and it doesn't always mean you've got excess estrogen. As you can see here, you can have low estrogen and normal progesterone. You can have low estrogen and lower progesterone and still have estrogen dominance. There are three main types of estrogen in our body, and bearing in mind testosterone can also convert into estradiol as well. So this is how men can develop estrogen hormone through testosterone conversion over to estrogen, same with women. So the first form is called estradiol, and that's the strongest, and that's the main estrogen. So that's quite the aggressive form of estrogen, and it's the one that is responsible for hormone-dependent cancers like ovarian cancer, breast cancer, and also all these sort of estrogen dominant conditions that we tend to see. But it's the one that's often linked with cancer is pro-carcinogenic. And then we've got estrone, which is the weaker sister of estradiol, but it's still considered the bad estrogen. And that's primarily made during menopause, and it can be produced in fat cells. And then we've got estriol, that's the weakest, and that's made during pregnancy, and it's considered the good estrogen. And then we've got, when we look at estrogen and estrone, these are converted to estriol by the liver as it prepares estrogen to be detoxified. So that's why the estriol is kind of like the weaker, the good version, because it's kind of almost the broken down product, or can be converted down by the aggressive form. So when we look at conversion of estrogen in the liver, we know the, if you look here, we can see that there's 16 alpha hydroxy estrogen and the 4 hydroxy estrogen. So these are carcinogenic, pro-carcinogenic. So that's the 2 hydroxy estrone is that one there. These are the good estrogen, and then you've got the 4, which is that one there, and the 16 is that one there. 4 hydroxy estrone and 16 hydroxy estrone. These are more pro-cancer causing. So when we support the liver, we can actually push it down the non-aggressive route. So we can help push the conversion down this pathway, which is a much safer pathway for conversion, as opposed to the liver pushing the conversion down to this pathway or this pathway. But even if we convert it to the 16, which is the potentially cancer causing version, the body can still convert that over to estriol, as we mentioned before. So it can neutralize and reduce the harmful effect of these aggressive estrogen, but the body has to be able to convert it down. And if you look at some of these enzymes, you can't, this is a very, very simple diagram, and I have got another JPEG, which is much more in depth. But if you look at some of the enzymes involved in this pathway, you've got, these are cytochrome P4, cytochrome enzymes. So CYP are cytochrome enzymes. So they're families of enzymes that live in the liver, and they're responsible for your liver detox pathways. You've got COMT as well. COMT is another is another gene that is responsible for breaking down and detoxifying estrogen, but they also detoxify neurotransmitters like dopamine and adrenaline. So when people have got defective gene that codes for COMT, so if they've got genetic, what we call genetic SNPs or gene mutation, and we can run these gene mutations through DNA genetic testing through companies like My DNA Health, and we can see that if someone's got COMT mutation, that means that they can't convert, they can't break down estrogen. COMT's also responsible for breaking down xenobiotics as well. So they are man-made chemicals such as antibiotics, pesticides, and those sort of things. So anything that is foreign to the body is called xenobiotic. So COMT's are responsible in a big way for breaking down chemicals and hormones and toxins. And so if someone's got a genetic defect for COMT, we will see these toxins and estrogen metabolites and aggressive estrogens building up in the system. The other thing is people who have COMT mutation tend to have anxiety, a sleep problem, and depression, or they're very anxious, and they can flip very easily, you know, so they've got a lesser threshold to deal with anger and stuff, because COMT is responsible for breaking down neurotransmitters. So if it's not working, then you've got neurotransmitters like adrenaline not breaking down, dopamine, these neurotransmitters, they just keep building up, these catecholamines, they keep building up in the body. So of course, if you've got if you're making lots of adrenaline because you're stressed out and you're not able to break it down, then guess what, it keeps building up and it keeps having that positive effect on your receptors in your body. So it keeps firing up the sympathetic nervous system, raising your heart rate, giving you anxiety and stuff. So, you know, I'm dealing with a lot of people with chronic anxiety. And I really suggest they do DNA testing, because we need to see what's going on a genetic level, and we need to see what we can do to support some of these pathways. Otherwise, it's very difficult, as you know, and people kind of have to live with suffering from these conditions. And it affects your estrogen as well. So it affects your hormone, anxiety, hormone, depression. You know, it's not just about the anxiety, it's not just about the hormone, but it starts to affect your whole life. So that's important to understand. So estrogen metabolites, the liver responsible for converting estradiol to the estrone, which is the weaker version. Both the 4 and 16 forms are considered factors in hormone-related cancers, as I mentioned. Promoting the 2-hydroxy over the 4 and 16 have been found to lower symptoms of menopause, such as hot flashes, PMS-like symptoms, and breast tenderness. So the CYP1A1 is the cytochrome 1A1 enzyme. It works in the phase 1, which is the first phase of your liver liver detoxification, and that is responsible for converting estradiol to 2-hydroxyestrone, the weaker version. So if you've got genetic mutation with that gene, then that's not going to work very well. Or if you are taking certain medication that inhibits that enzyme, so a lot of the drugs and even herbs can actually either speed up certain enzyme pathways or they block certain enzyme pathways. So that's one of the most important drug, herb, drug, nutrient, drug type interactions that we need to keep an eye out for, because these enzymes, there's hundreds of them, and they all responsible for metabolizing different nutrients, different drugs, and things like that. So they're very specific to what they do. And then we've got nutrients like omega-3 fatty acid. Indole 3-carbinol is what's found in broccoli and a lot of your crucifers. The lignans in flaxseed, they all help to promote the effects, or they get the CP enzyme A1A, right? So phase 1 to work better. And therefore, when you're consuming omega-3 and you're taking indole 3-carbinol supplement, you're eating loads of broccoli and sprouts and Brussels sprouts, and you're doing 2 tablespoons of flaxseed a day in with your yogurt or your porridge, you are actually pushing the conversion of your aggressive estrogen down the 2-hydroxy, the safe route. So that's something you can incorporate straight away into your diet, is to make sure that every meal you eat, you've got a bit of broccoli or some kind of crucifer. Make sure you take your omega-3 as a supplement, and get 2 to 3 portions of oily fish a week. And then you've also got flaxseed, ground up flaxseed. It's also an incredible source of fiber, because 2 tablespoons of flaxseed will give you 35 grams of fiber, which is your daily recommended intake for fiber. So that's going to feed all the good bacteria. It's going to keep your bowels regular. And it's also, it acts on many levels. So it acts on the enzyme, but it also is a natural phytoestrogen. So it's going to block the receptors from receiving those aggressive estradiols that promote cancer. So the bottom line is, if someone's got estrogen dominance, or if they've got predisposition towards hormone type cancer, or if they've got cancer, they need to be on estrogen. And this includes men as well, particularly men with prostate cancer, because that's actually connected to having estrogen dominant as well. So flax is also very beneficial. So xenoestrogens are man-made chemical synthetic estrogens, and we find them in things like synthetic perfumes, in plastic, in scented candles. Anything that gives off a scent will have xenoestrogens. That includes your washing up powder, your laundry powder that smells great even after a month, because the phthalate, which is the synthetic fragrance that's used in these ingredients, will be loaded with xenoestrogen. The other thing is, you can find them also in till receipts. So if you're at the shop and you don't need a receipt, just say no thank you, get rid of the receipt, because the black ink and the receipt itself is actually they use the xenoestrogen in there to as part of the manufacturing process. So when you're touching those things, you are absorbing it through your skin. So there are numerous xenoestrogen. You can have a look on the internet. I've also got a detailed list of some of these things and what they do. I mean, there's so much study and research looking at how xenoestrogens actually work. And there are many epidemiological studies and documentaries done in areas where young boys are exposed to high levels of xenoestrogen. They actually have such tiny levels of testosterone, similar to what we find in women. So they're basically like a woman, inside, just about. So they're not developing their testosterone and their male hormone, because the estrogen is suppressing that, and their body's overloaded with estrogen. So there's a really good documentary called The Disappearing Male. You can watch it on YouTube, and it's a brilliant documentary showing how young boys are exposed to huge amounts of plastic and synthetic chemicals in this particular village in America, and a lot of the boys. Anyway, there was lots of fertility issues and hormone problems and things, and people couldn't figure out what was going on. And then eventually they uncovered what was the reason behind that. And there's so many documentaries along that line with, if you look at some of the work done by marine biologists, where they look at fish that end up swallowing the plastics that we pump into the ocean. They develop female organs, and the male fish develop female organs. They develop cancer. It's just staggering. They literally get these fish and the wildlife, the birds and stuff, they die as well, because they also eat stuff off the coast. They cut them up, and then they see these huge tumors inside them. So the effect of these plastics is very real, and the problem with these poor creatures is that they swallow those plastic lids, they swallow the plastic water bottles, and the plastic doesn't rot, right? So it sits in there in their gut, and it releases the hormone, the estrogen, the xenoestrogen, over and over and over long periods of time, and that's why they suffer all these problems. So it's not like we drink water from a plastic bottle and it's in our system and then it gets excreted. When these creatures, these animals, these fish and these birds, when they swallow these plastic things that we chuck out, and particularly out in the third world where there's no system for recycling, the plastics are building up in the ocean, and these animals and the whales, they're disappearing in certain parts of Southeast Asia. So yeah, it's the dolphins, sorry, not the whales. I'm sure the whales are suffering as well. There's loads of pictures of them washed up on the shore, but the dolphins are disappearing in certain parts of Southeast Asia. So that's something about xenoestrogen, and this is why I'm really hot on making your own natural skincare cosmetic. It can be very simple. You put it into a glass jar, so you're never exposed to plastics. And if you're freezing food, then please use like bamboo containers, use metallic like stainless steel containers and stuff. You can get them quite cheap now anyway. I got a whole load in TK Maxx, like bamboo food storage containers, and even Lidl sells metallic stainless steel food containers. Or if you are storing a plastic container, then maybe just line it with something that is safe, like what do you call it, beeswax, lining agent or whatever, before you so it's just minimizing contact, right? It's just minimizing your food, the food that you're eating, in direct contact with plastic. And the worst thing you can do is microwave your food in plastic containers, because when you're heating up the plastic, the phthalates and the chemical from the plastic is leaching out much easier into the food. So even if you're storing in plastic containers, make sure you pour it out into a glass bowl and microwave it, or cook it on stove. I mean, I don't even own a microwave, but that's another story altogether. But the point is trying to minimize contact as much as possible. But you can imagine a lot of people buying processed food in a plastic container, and then it tells you to cook in the oven for 15 minutes. And during that 15-minute cook time, the plastic and the chemical is leaching slowly into your food. So there are a lot we can do to minimize exposure, and as tedious as it sounds, it really adds up. And I went to a hormone conference many years ago and met this guy, chiropractor in America, and he alluded to a study where there were a group of scientists, and they were studying the cells of breast cancer and how it was growing in a petri dish. And so one of the petri dish was made of plastic, so they had breast cancer cells in a plastic petri dish, and they were observing the environment at which the cancer cells were dividing. And then the other one, it wasn't in a plastic petri dish. So if you're not sure what a petri dish is, it's a medium for growth. So it's just like a jelly substance where they've got nutrients in them, and we use that to test the growth of bacteria. So we might swab our throat or our skin, and then we dab it on the petri dish, and if there's bugs there, it will feed on the nutrient on this jelly this jelly dish, and then it starts to grow. So then we can look under the microscope and see, yes, it's a staph infection or whatever it is. So they had a cancer cell on a petri dish, and when they came back, the one that was in the plastic dish, it was growing like crazy compared to the other one. So it was feeding off the plastic as well. So it's really interesting, actually, when you look at the effect of xenoestrogen on our cells, and particularly on estrogen. Okay, so when we look at genetic defect, I mean, this is a big area. If you've got methylation defect, and I covered methylation already in one of my free training, but we will go through that in a separate lecture on genetic. But if you've got methylation defect and your body can't methylate, and this is very, very important for dealing with kids with autism, with any kind of spectrum related disorder, with anxiety, with depression, with miscarriages and fertility and stuff, because if your body can't methylate properly, a lot of these processes isn't going to happen, and you have buildup of toxin, buildup of neurotransmitters, and that's sort of the root cause of many of these issues that we see. So even once we correct our nutritional status and people still got loads of symptom, is because we haven't addressed the genetic. There's a gene called the COMT gene. So the COMT gene codes for the so how it works is that you've got genes in your body, and then the genes will kind of like it allows the body to make certain types of protein, and a lot of the enzymes that your body produces in order to convert, for example, the inactive form of vitamin B to an active form, or to break down protein into amino acid. Everything in your body requires a whole load of stuff for it to work properly, including vitamins, minerals, and enzymes. So many of the genes actually code for production of enzymes, and enzymes are just made with protein, essentially. So genes allow, it's kind of like a template for, to tell your body to make the enzyme, but to make it correctly, if you know what I mean. It's like you're building a car and you've got a manual and it says, okay, you need a steering wheel, you need 4 seats, or you need a brake. So that's what your genes do. Your genes is it provides a template for your body to be able to manufacture these enzymes and all the other stuff that it makes correctly. So when you've got a genetic defect in a particular gene, you're not going to be able to make these end products correctly, and it's usually these enzymes and things that get affected. So the classic example here is the COMT gene. Allows for transcription or the formation of the COMT enzyme, which is known as catechol-O-methyltransferase, and that is needed to break down xenobiotics. So it's needed to break down antibiotics, drugs, chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, and those things that we eat every day through our diet, because it's hard to avoid all these things, isn't it? You can't get organic food all the time, even if you want to. It's also responsible for breaking down estrogen. So if you've got a genetic defect for this, you're not going to be able to break down estrogen properly. And as I said before, it's responsible for breaking down dopamine and epinephrine, which is basically adrenaline. So you're going to have anxiety, you're going to potentially get mood disorders, right? So like bipolar disorder, 1 minute you're up, 1 minute you're down. You're going to be very anxious all the time because you've got adrenaline just building up because you haven't got the enzyme to break it down. And so this is something very important when dealing with chronic anxiety or people who have sort of chronic mood disorders. And then you've got this vicious cycle where when you have raised estrogen and you have chronic stress, that inhibits COMT anyway. So even if your COMT is working mediocre and is trying to do its job with whatever capacity it's running on, if you have raised estrogen or estrogen dominance, that inhibits COMT. So that then allows you to have more estrogen, and then the more estrogen will then cause the COMT to work less. So it's this negative vicious cycle that's going on. And then you've got and then you've got other pathways. So you've got the MTHF, you've got the methylation pathway, the methionine, the whole thing's connected. So in terms of nutrients that you need, you want to be focusing on all the B vits, as we mentioned, because they are very important for methylation. And you may want to consume a product called SAMe, SAME. Sorry, there's an E that's kind of missing at the end here. Because that's a cofactor, so that works with the COMT. So that is something that people can take to help with this process. But I wouldn't recommend doing any of that until you get genetic testing, because these are very finely balanced neurotransmitters and processes in the body. And if you make any alteration or adjustment, you need to know what you're doing. You need to have some kind of lab test so you can see what's going on. You need some guidance from a practitioner, so you're introducing dosages at the right dose and not going in really, really high, because it can kind of flip both ways. And the COMT gene can actually do both. It can speed up the COMT enzyme. So here it can make it work really fast, which means that it's breaking down all these things really quickly, so you haven't got enough of it. Then you end up with depression, because you're breaking down dopamine and adrenaline and epinephrine too quickly, and it's breaking down estrogen too quickly. Or it can be the opposite. It can slow it down, so it may work too much or it may work too little. But most of the time we see it working too little rather than too fast, if you know what I mean, in terms of the amount of symptoms that people get when they have COMT gene defect. So we can also support people with Siberian or Korean ginseng. So that's Erythrococcus centrococcus. Sounds a bit rude, but I think that's Korean ginseng, not Siberian ginseng. And then you've got ashwagandha, you've got, which I talk a lot about. Passion flower is lovely. I have passion flower by the kilos here, so if you want any, let me know and I'll send you a complimentary packet to try. Lemon balm is lovely. I keep all of these at home. I mean, I always keep these as adaptogens because they're lovely to take as herbal teas. And you can also, in the herbal module, you can also learn how to make herbal tinctures with them. So you can combine all three and make a lovely calming adrenal support, sleep, herbal tincture. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So these all support COMT. And so if people have got symptoms of estrogen dominance and they've got symptoms of anxiety and depression, do we need to run a COMT test? No, we don't really. We can give them ashwagandha, passion flower, lemon balm. We can give them minerals, B complex. So you can see here, although it's very useful to run genetic testing, we don't have to, but it would be nice to see exactly what's going on, support people further. And that's the difference between what I do, what naturopathic nutritionists do, and what functional medicine doctors and practitioners, mostly in the US, do. Is the functional guys really love to run a lot of testing up front, whereas we feel that, well, look at this, is common sense, isn't it? Let's just start with the very basic first, see how people improve. Let's just fix all the basic stuff, get their baseline nutrition, sleep, stress right, and then we'll see how they get on. And if they're 90% fixed, then hey, there's no point wasting hundreds of thousands of pounds running tests. But if we're not getting anywhere, let's run the test. And certainly for people that can afford it, the test is only about 150 to 200 pounds anyway, and it's incredibly comprehensive. It tests for hundreds and hundreds of genes and parameters, so it's really useful. We'll go through some of the testing and look at sample reports in the genetic lecture, but yes, for your information here, you don't need to know that at this point. So estrogen dominant conditions, we have endometriosis, fibroids, ovarian cysts. A lot of these will sound very familiar to you because you probably either have it yourself or know someone that knows someone that has it, because it's very common. Prostate problems are male andropause, fibrocystic breast disease, PMS, for example. So the kind of symptoms that people might get also include bloating. So say if someone hasn't got a formal diagnosis, and I get this a lot, I get people messaging me and going, oh, Lena, I've got all of these things, but I've got to wait 6 months to see a consultant for him to tell me what's going on with me. And I'm like, I think you got estrogen dominance, let's just do something. But they're like, no, I'd like to get a test or report, a scan first before I do anything. And so that's the thing. Having this knowledge means that you can apply basic common sense, you can apply basic nutrition and healthy living principle and get yourself sorted sooner than later. Other symptoms include hair loss, thyroid, because estrogen also works with thyroid. So you might get thyroid dysfunction, sluggish metabolism, weight gain, or resistant weight loss. You might not be able to lose weight despite what you do. Memory and foggy thinking, that's always an issue with estrogen and hormone problems. Fatigue, insomnia. So many people have sleeping problems and insomnia, and PMS as well. Okay, so the problem with estrogen dominant is it's not just about the fact that we've got too much estrogen compared to progesterone. The core problem is because the liver and the bowel is not eliminating estrogen properly. So estrogen goes through several phases. The first part is called phase 1 detoxification, and in this phase the cytochrome enzymes actually convert estrogen into what they call an intermediate metabolite. So it kind of like converts it into this form, which is kind of sitting there hanging around waiting for something else to come along and take it somewhere else further down the factory. So that's kind of phase 1. And the intermediate metabolite can be quite toxic because they're not being neutralized yet. So they're sort of in this this kind of precarious situation. And so if the body is working and it's making lots of phase 1 metabolite, but the phase 2 is very slow, then you're gonna have all these intermediate metabolite building up, and it's not going anywhere, and it can create toxicity in the body. So that's why when we talk about detoxification, you have to understand all the different phases. Phase 1, phase 2 is in the liver. Phase 3 is what happens in the gut with the gut bacteria, and then phase 4 it goes into your it goes through your feces or your urine to be excreted. So you've got to look at the entire process, and you got to look at the nutrients and things that affect certain phases and make sure they're balanced. So you don't want to do too much phase 2 and not enough phase 1, or too much phase 1 not enough phase 2, or if your bowels are clogged up and you've got perfect phase 1 phase 2 but all these estrogen is knocking on the door of your bowel trying to get out, and you're constipated and it's building up, or you've got loads of dysbiosis and you've got candida and parasite building up, and so the metabolism of estrogen needs to be balanced the entire way in order for you to get rid of it. It's kind of like a plumbing system if you think about it. If you've got blockages in certain parts of your plumbing, then the entire thing's not going to work, isn't it? It's got to flow evenly throughout the whole process. So in phase 2, so phase 1 is when it gets converted to an intermediate metabolite by the cytochrome enzymes. Phase 2 it undergoes a process called conjugation. So conjugation is when the estrogen now needs to bind to something. So it's a conjugate, right? It needs to bind to something. So it needs to bind to something, it binds to something, and then now the body's ready to take it out through the bile system, the bile duct into the large intestine, and then out it goes. So if the conjugation process doesn't work properly, again, you're going to get toxicity, you're going to get these toxins. And we're not just talking about estrogen, because phase 1 detoxification also involves every chemical that you've ingested, bacteria, so not bacteria, but it involves all your xenobiotics, your antibiotics, your medication, the stuff you inhaled, if you sprayed some hair spray or dye, or you may have inhaled some petrol while you're pumping your petrol. Your body's got to get rid of all those chemicals, so they all go through phase 1 and then phase 2, and then out they go. So but in this context we're talking about the estrogen. So this is how estrogen works. It undergoes a process called glucuronidation in the liver. So glucuronidation is one of the phase 2 processes. So in this phase, a phase 2 process that can conjugate estrogen and can be affected by intestinal health. So the end product of this process is it forms what's called an E-glucuronide. So the estrogen binds to a glucuronide, and it forms this conjugate called E-glucuronide. And this process can actually be interrupted by bad bacteria in the gut. So in other training, I've mentioned that the estrogen binds to a compound, and then the body's able to then get rid of it through the gut. But the bad bacteria, if there's too many of them present, and of course the bad bacteria are suppressed by the good bacteria. So if you've got lots of good, healthy, good bacteria, this process is fine. You're going to get rid of the estrogen. But if you've got an overgrowth of yeast and candida and parasites and bad bacteria, they produce an enzyme called beta glucuronidase. So that's an enzyme that cuts this up. It literally chops this in half. The estrogen now becomes a free agent again, and therefore it doesn't get taken out of the body, because the estrogen doesn't kind of float out on its own. It has to bind to a substrate, so it has to bind to something to get it out of the system through this process, glucuronidation. So that's how gut health affects your hormone health. That's one of the many factors, not the only, but one of the many. So the estrogen then is reabsorbed instead of being excreted, and it contributes to estrogen dominance. And so the interesting thing is that it may not show up in a normal estrogen test, as it is now estriol. So, I mean, it can be very confusing, or the testing and that, because people often say, but my GP's done testing, my hormone levels are all normal, but I'm still exhibiting all these symptoms. So please don't rely on just the testing alone. And with regard to testing, there are several ways to test for hormone. You've got saliva testing, urine testing, and blood testing, and they all give different results. So again, we'll cover testing in another lecture, or we can do that as an add-on training. But don't just go by what your GPs are doing, because they will be taking most of the time probably a blood test. And then many nutrition companies, private testing, they do saliva. And then you've got the best one, the gold standard is the Dutch test, which uses dried urine. It does a urine test, and it tests for your metabolites. So it actually tests for your breakdown product as well, not just your primary hormone. So that's actually quite a complicated area, but I will go through the hormone testing with you in another lecture, just to simplify a bit, just so you have an awareness that these are the tests that you can do. You don't have to know how to interpret them all, because that's the job of the test provider. They're supposed to provide you with a report of what they think is going on, and your practitioner should also give you a recommendation, an interpretation of the test. But the important thing is, you know, the difference between going to a GP or ordering a test on Genova Diagnostics website or doing a Dutch test. Okay, so moving on, there's a nutrient called calcium D-glucarate, or glucarate, sorry, it's also spelled with an A as well. That aids estrogen excretion through the glucuronidation process. And the famous indole 3-carbinol, which you see in practically every estrogen type of supplement. So any supplement that claims to detox estrogen will use indole 3-carbinol, and that's found in your cruciferous, which is why I always bang on about make sure you eat your broccoli, you know, like your mummy told you, because all your cruciferous contain indole 3-carbinol, and you just got to make sure you don't boil it and cook it to death as well. Make sure it's just steamed, slightly crunchy, so the nutrient's still there. And so you can buy all these in a supplement form as well. The D-glucarate is found in apples, pears, grapefruit, citrus fruit, and broccoli. So an easy way to do it is you find foods that are high in these nutrients that you need, you chop it all up, form a fruit bowl, and same with the vegetable, you make a vegetable bowl or a vegetable salad with them, and then you've got all the right things to eat all in one go. Mix all that lot there with a bit of yogurt and something, and ground up flaxseed, sprinkle on top. And then the broccoli, you can add that to asparagus and various other nutrients that support gut, liver. You know, toss it in with some rockets, and then you've got a lovely vegetable salad which has everything you need to support liver, gut, hormone, adrenal function. So that's kind of what I teach. I don't try to make things super complicated. I just trying to make it really simple. And I have taught people to look, rather than trying to make lots of different stuff, why don't you just have 2 bowls in the fridge 3 times a week, a bowl of cut up fruit and a bowl of raw or semi-boiled vegetable, and then you can toss in your salad of choice, and then you've got yourself a very quick meal or snack. Okay, so moving on, liver detox as well is sulfation. Sulfation is when a sulfur group are added to estrogen intermediate, forming phase 2. So you need sulfur. Sulfur is a really important part of liver detoxification. Recently, I managed to find Himalayan rock salt that looks black. It's basically sulfur Himalayan rock salt. I mean, it absolutely stinks. It just smells like rotten eggs. But it's great because if you do need to use sulfur in your diet, you can just buy the black Himalayan rock salt and grind that into your food. I mean, I don't mind it. I'm used to taking really weird stuff, but it does smell like rotten eggs. Because that's the smell of the sulfur. So that's great. You're getting loads of sulfur through something like that. You can use egg yolk, garlic, onion, Brussels sprout. MSN is also, MSN is methyl sulfonomethane. So that is a nutritional supplement which is brilliant for arthritis and pain. It's a natural painkiller. It's also fantastic for arthritis. But that also helps the liver, also helps with the hormones. So that's great as a supplement to take, particularly if you're kind of getting the creaks a bit, you know, and you're getting a bit of arthritis or wear and tear on your joints and things. So yeah, so something like this, you can do an omelette. You know, you can do a couple of eggs with garlic and onion. You can do chopped up Brussels sprout and serve that on the side or inside. I tend to add vegetable inside the omelette, so then the omelette becomes like a full meal. If you just chop up or grate some cabbages and carrots and stick that inside your omelette, you can turn that into a lovely healthy meal. So glutathione conjugation is another process, and here adding glutathione, you probably already hear and understand about glutathione. That's your master antioxidant. So glutathione is one of the most powerful antioxidants that your body makes. It actually makes its own, but often it doesn't make enough because we're exposed to so much toxicity. So yeah, so in this case, the glutathione gets added to estrogen, which allows it to be excreted easily. So you can find glutathione in avocados, walnut, asparagus, vitamin C as well. The vitamin C stimulates the body's glutathione production. I drink hydrogen water. Hydrogen gas also stimulates in a very big way glutathione synthesis, and it does 100 other jobs. So that's Kangen water. But you know, it doesn't have to be Kangen water. It can be other forms of hydrogen gas based water that you drink. So that's another conversation. But glutathione, anything that increases production of that, you can also take that as a supplement. You can also take an acetylcysteine, which is the compound that breaks down into glutathione in the body. So as far as supporting the liver goes, if people need liver support, hormone support, liver support, and antioxidant support, I always make sure they get glutathione. The best form to get in a supplement is liposomal form. So that's the form that gets absorbed the best. Otherwise, you can buy glutathione in a tablet or a capsule, but the liposomal form is the best form to purchase. So inside the natural dispensary, there's a brand called LipoLife, and they sell a vast array of all liposomal supplements. And again, methylation helps excrete excess estrogen by donating a methyl group. So that's the CH3 group, and that happens in phase 2, and you need all these nutrients here: B3, B6, B12, folic acid, activated folic acid. So that's where the B vits come in terms of trying to balance your estrogen. You want to be taking a supplement with activated B vitamin, methyl B vits, 50 milligram a day, some glutathione or N-acetylcysteine, or trying to get it through your diet. And then you want to be supporting your body by adding extra sulfur to your diet as well. So after it goes through phase 1 and then conjugation phase 2, it now gets excreted through the bile. So that means you need good bile flow. And I think the bile, in terms of the digestive system, the bile is often underlooked and under discussed, as in we don't talk about it enough, but we need to, because if we don't make enough bile, or our bile flow is very sluggish, a lot of toxins build up in the system. So the liver contains literally loads of bile ducts, and the biles, they drain from the liver into the gallbladder. The gallbladder concentrates the bile, and as soon as you eat a fatty meal, the gallbladder opens up and it squeezes out bile, and then it emulsifies the fat, and then and all the toxins, things, and then it gets excreted through the intestine. So if someone's on birth control pills, they may have issues with estrogen clearance, because the birth control pill can inhibit bile flow. And there may be other drugs and things that do the same. And how many people do you know have gallbladder problem, sluggish bile problem? So make sure you understand and consume bitter food, bitter tincture. You can make your own digestive tinctures or purchase that. You can use Swedish bitter or any kind of digestive bitter, and just make sure you're trying to eat bitter food as often as you can. So that's your asparagus, your rockets, and even actually something very simple is the citrusy, the bitter elements, the citrusy part of the skin of organic lemons and oranges. So they're all very bitter, right? So anything that you can taste that's bitter is going to improve bile flow. So if you're buying lemon, try to buy the organic one so you don't have to chuck out the skin, and then grate the zest of the skin. So if you're making a salad, make sure you grate the zest of organic lemon. Otherwise, it's such a waste throwing all those wonderful essential oils away, and add the zest into the salad. And that way you're making it a bit bitter. You're also adding all those limonene and all those wonderful antiseptic essential oils and cleansing effects of the essential oil, which is found in the skin, not so much inside the fruit or the vegetable or the fruit itself, but it's on the skin. So lemon, oranges, and all those kind of citrusy fruits are very bitter. So what a lot of people do is they cut the skin and they air dry it, and then they turn it into a tincture, add a bit of alcohol, 40%, leave it for 4 to 6 weeks, and then all the bitter nutrients and the essential oils will come out into the tincture. And then you can actually make your own digestive bitter using orange or lemon peel, combining that with other ingredients, and I have a few recipes for these. So that's something quite fun to do, to just save it and dry it up. SAMe, so that's one of the nutrients I mentioned earlier, that can also improve bile flow as well. Okay, so hormones and the gut. We mentioned this before in other lectures. Healthy hormone function is needed for healthy intestinal linings and function. Estrogen modulates the permeability and the tight junctions. So when people get leaky gut, it could be due to estrogen imbalances. Progesterone also protects the lining as well. And then you've also got the diversity and ratios of certain types of bacteria. So the bottom line is that you need healthy gut bacteria to have healthy hormone level, but you also need healthy hormone level to have healthy functional gut. So they work in tandem. What else is there here to have a look at? Sex hormones can influence the gut-brain connection through the hypothalamus pituitary axis. And then we've got, that could be due to estrogen's relationship with serotonin. I mean, without getting to a lot more complexity, there is a lot of communication going on between the hormones, the gut, and the adrenal axis, so the hypothalamus axis as well. So we do know, and there's studies, there's more and more emerging studies. We don't know exactly how all these things work, but we do know that our hormones, progesterone and estrogen, has a direct impact on the gut, and the gut also has a direct impact on the hormones. Sex hormone binding globulin, I mentioned about this in my sugar webinar, so you can watch that if you haven't. When you eat a lot of sugar, your sex hormone binding globulin levels are affected. And so in the body, estrogen only exerts its effect if it's floating around in what's called its free state. So it's not bound to anything. When it's bound to something, and normally it's bound to sex hormone binding globulin, that kind of like deactivates it. So anything that reduces the level of sex hormone binding globulin will allow your body to have a lot more free available estrogen floating around to exert its effect on the body. And so insulin and high sugar intake reduces sex hormone binding globulin, which means it can have a direct effect on estrogen dominance. And we often see these women who have estrogen dominance, when you look at their diet, it's largely pastries and white stuff and high sugar, high carbohydrate, high sugar. if excess of estrogen, for example, if they're on birth control pills and HRT, sex hormone binding globulin can shut down testosterone as well. So sex hormone binding globulin is a key factor as well in terms of having the higher levels of estrogen floating about, and therefore causing this estrogen dominance ratio between estrogen and progesterone. So I hope it's not been too overwhelming. I mean, you've got the webinars and you can watch it again. And as with anything, when you listen to it the first time, it's a lot harder to sink in and harder to understand. But the more you learn, the more you read, it actually starts to fall into place and starts to make sense. And I'm here to support you and answer any questions anyway. The important thing is you know what you need to do. There's no point learning loads of theory, but you need to action it. You need to know what to do in order to get the levels balanced. So adrenals and estrogen. Cortisol has an effect on several of our sex hormones. Excess cortisol elevates estrogen level by promoting testosterone conversion to estrogen. So this is your typical pot belly syndrome. You've got high cortisol, and then you get fat building around the abdomen, and you sort of get muscle, breaking down to fat, and then you've also got testosterone converting into estrogen. So that's a problem, and particularly seen in men as well as women. So the enzyme that allows for this to take place is the aromatase enzyme. And so when patients have got breast cancer, for example, and even, you wouldn't believe this, even people with no cancer, but they've got endometriosis and fibroids, doctors are actually putting those patients on aromatase inhibitors now. So they're putting patients on aromatics and the kind of drugs used for cancer patient for the exact same reason, to prevent conversion into estrogen. So we need to have a look at that and think, hang on, we can kind of do this naturally without taking all these medication. And so there's a whole raft of nutrients that will do the exact job or very similar job to those kind of drugs, and it works on these aromatase enzymes. So the adrenals also convert progesterone to cortisol as well, and we talked about that in the first lecture when we talk about the pregnenolone steal, whereby if you are under chronic stress for too long, your body needs to make lots of cortisol, so it's stealing, it's diverting the production pathway of pregnenolone into progesterone instead of the other sex hormones. So this is where it pulls progesterone production to make cortisol instead of allowing progesterone to then turn into other sex hormones. So this is where you get that problem with the pregnenolone steal, and you get deficiencies in progesterone. And when you get deficiency in progesterone, you've got that estrogen dominance. So chronic stress equals estrogen dominance, because you're dropping your progesterone, because you're using progesterone to make cortisol. Okay, and then that causes infertility as well, because now you haven't got enough progesterone to support the second stage of the menstrual cycle. So after ovulation, implantation, you need lots of progesterone to support the endometrial lining so that you can grow your baby. And if the progesterone is not there, then you can have early miscarriages, right? So the whole thing fits in together. Okay, so having all that in mind, what do we do? How do we make this work? Firstly, intestinal health, healthy adrenals, and good liver function. It always goes back to these things, no matter what you talk about. It always goes back to the bare basics, which is making sure you support your adrenals, your stress, healthy liver, all the nutrients that you need to work the liver properly, and then good intestinal healthy gut bacteria and salt leaky gut, etc. So with liver health, there's a lot that you can do, but let's keep it simple. You've got deglucarate foods that we mentioned before. You've got milk thistle. Milk thistle is wonderful, and it's one of the main nutrients that can help the liver to regenerate. So if you've got a liver, certain parts where the liver cirrhosis and the liver cells have died off, the milk thistle actually can help regenerate the liver. It's got anti-cancer properties as well, and it's one of the key ones that I always recommend for liver support. So that's really great if someone's having a glass too many, drinking too much alcohol, or they've got alcoholic liver problems. Non-alcoholic liver problems also, I'm seeing that a lot as well in obese clients and hormone estrogen dominant. So they may not be caused by alcohol, but they've got fatty liver. So yeah, so milk thistle is great. So you can take that as a tincture. That's probably the best way to do it. You can take it as a capsule. You can also take it as a tea. I've been to a few Polish grocery stores and they sell milk thistle, ground up milk thistle, which you can just stir into water and make it as a tea. So there's lots of ways to consume milk thistle, and it tastes okay. You know, it's not amazing, but it's like any other herbal thing. It's okay to take as a tea. Sulfur-rich foods, we mentioned lemons and limes. So they contain an active ingredient called limonene. They're also powerful antimicrobial, but it's also really helpful, and that's why people often do lemon in the morning, lemon and warm water. But don't forget the lemon skin, as I mentioned, you grate that. Or if you're baking a cake or you're making some bran muffin or something, just use the lemon skin, the lemon peel, get the zest, grate that in, get the skin and the essential oil into your cooking, your baking, and you'll really support your gut and your liver. Your cruciferous for the indole 3-carbinol, bitter foods like dandelion, kale, rapini, collard greens, and rockets, as I mentioned before, and also bitter melons, which is often found in Oriental, Indian, or Asian, Vietnamese, Chinese type grocery stores. So a lot of ways to incorporate bitters into your food. And then lots and lots of antioxidants. So that's just all your colorful fruits and vegetables, berries and things. So phytoestrogen is very important because you're going to help block those receptor sites for the aggressive estrogen. So that includes things like your tofu, for example. Seaweeds, tofu, all should be included in your diet. Make sure it's non-GMO. You want to support your gut and your liver, your adrenal, with adaptogens. So you should probably have at least 3 to 5 different types of adaptogens in your cupboard, whether it's in a tincture form, a herbal tea, or a powder form that you can make into a protein ball. So you want to have ashwagandha powder, amla powder. You want to have like tulsi tea. You might want to have ashwagandha tincture, melissa lemon balm, herbs that you can make into a tea. So I think you get the gist of what I'm trying to say. You want to turn these into a medicine, a food-based protocol, not just rely on supplements and pills and stuff, but to be able to eat and drink and, you know, and consume these things. And then it becomes part of your lifestyle rather than just another fad diet that you're going to do for 6 months to sort your gut and your liver. You want to do it for life. And that's really the idea of everything we're doing here, is we're trying to create lifetime good habits. And then look at, just kind of like do a household detox and see how many xenobiotics and plastics and things you are actually in contact with. Are you drinking water from a plastic bottle? Are you storing food in a plastic container? Are you spraying perfume on? Are you using hair dye, because that's full of estrogen and toxic chemicals and stuff? And by all means, you don't have to stop doing these things. It's just finding safer, healthier, less toxic alternatives, or even just minimize it. You know, so if you if you want to use your I don't know, fairy washing up powder, that's fine. Just do less of it. Maybe do that 3 times a week, and then use Ecova the remaining 4 times a week. So it's really about toxin minimization, because we're never going to be able to eliminate these things completely, but we can reduce the exposure to them. Okay, so in terms of phytoestrogen, there are many categories. You've got isoflavones, which are found in soys and other legumes. You've got comestans, which are found in legumes. So that's like your lentils and beans and stuff. Alfalfa and clover. And that's why you often see clover found in women's hormone-based type nutritional supplements. Lignans, which is your flaxseed. Stilbenoids such as resveratrol. So that's one of my favorite, because it's such a powerful antioxidant. So resveratrol is found in the seed and the skin of red grapes, not white, only red. So a glass of red wine now and again is actually not bad for you at all. Flavonoids such as rutin and quercetin. Rutin's really good for veins, so for varicose vein, and you often see that in varicose vein and circulation type supplement. I have a friend in Egypt, and her mum, oh my goodness, she sent me photos of her mum's leg, and it was purple, and I'm thinking, God, I think that leg's going to drop off any minute. Anyway, she got on to Rutin, took that, and then I gave her advice to take loads of zinc, like really high dose zinc. And yeah, her wound started to heal really quickly, and her circulation really improved. I think they can benefit from far infrared, but I think it's, you know, it's a bit out of budget there. But anyway, Rutin's really great for circulation. So if you've got varicose vein problems or any kind of circulation problem, that's great. It strengthens the veins. It's kind of one of its main jobs. Quercetin is becoming very well known now. It's great. It fights COVID. Loads of research for quercetin. Quercetin supports lung function, so it's helpful for asthma. And that's where the research comes from, with pregnant women who eat 5 apples a day, reduce the risk of the newborn having asthma and all these lung problems. Quercetin, I take that in a powder, so I just a teaspoon into a bit of yogurt. It's nice and easy to take. So that's a form of antioxidant, that's a form of flavonoid. And then we have the ellagic acid, which is the ellagitannins or ellagic acid, and that's found in your raspberries, your pomegranates, and almond. And so ellagic acid in raspberry particularly, it's very effective against human papilloma virus, the HPV viruses. And in India, they run large studies looking at using that to treat HPV instead of getting vaccines and stuff. What else is there? Yeah, so that's really powerful stuff. Raspberry, what's in raspberry, and pomegranate, which is why I tend to recommend pomegranate a lot for women, because it really helps to balance the hormones, and because it contains the ellagic acid in there as well. So you can get these things in supplement. There's lots of pomegranate based supplements you can see on Amazon, on the internet. They ground up the pomegranate seed, but I prefer just to use it fresh. I just eat it as a snack, or I add it to salad, or stick it in a smoothie and blend it up. Lots of different ways to use pomegranate. You can also buy it frozen now, so when it's out of season, the supermarkets will freeze them in a plastic bag, of course. And then but yes, I mean, it's a bit of a compromise, but you can buy frozen pomegranate quite cheaply and then have that as well. And it saves you from having to cut it up and you know, have red hands and red chopping boards. Okay, so just have a look to see how we're going for time. We are going to wrap it up soon. Okay, so phytoestrogens, what do? So they block estrogen receptors in the body. So they're weaker, they're really weak compared to the real estrogen, but they do bind to estrogen receptors, and they stop the aggressive estrogens from binding to it. So it's kind of like sticking chewing gum into a lock, and therefore when the real key comes along, you can't open the door, and that's the thing. It's blocking the aggressive estrogen from exerting its toxic effect on the body, so it displaces those estrogen. So that's what phytoestrogens do, which means you want to be consuming these day in, day out in your body. So it's really helpful for patients with cancer or kind of any hormone, estrogen dominant type hormone type conditions. So that's basically it in a nutshell. And then it allows the this is important. So by locking onto the receptors, they force detoxification of real estrogen, right? So that's the thing, because the estrogen now is not able to do its job. It's not able to lock onto estrogen receptor. It's now got to get out of the system. It's got to get detoxified out of the system. But the important thing is that it's not letting these estrogens from exerting its effect on the body. So it has that two-prong approach. So we talked about xenobiotic already. That's the BPA and the plastics, etc. I mentioned HRT, birth control pills. They promote the aggressive cancer-causing 16-hydroxyestrone. Taking the stress of the liver is helpful by avoiding them, which is the best thing to do. And then helping your liver to get rid of them is the next best thing to do. Okay, so soy is a good one. A lot of people are concerned about taking soy because they heard that maybe soy can cause cancer or soy can cause um, thyroid problem, because soy is a goitrogen. So people with a low or sluggish thyroid are concerned about taking it because they think it's going to block their thyroid. The conclusion is that you don't really need to be worried about that, because you're not going to consume enough soy unless you're vegan to have any real impact on your thyroid. The important thing you got to know is you have to buy non-GMO soy. That's the most problematic thing about soy, is the genetically modified part of it. So if you can be guaranteed that is a non-GMO soy you're buying, then if you're taking a quarter of a cup of tofu or two tablespoons of soybean or half a cup of soy milk, you are getting roughly 10 milligram. And 10 milligram in a clinical trial with 9,000 patients who had breast cancer showed a 25% risk of recurrence. So that's pretty significant finding. So I do advocate soy, high quality, organic, non-GMO soy, particularly if you've got estrogen problems, and even better if you've got no thyroid problems. But if you do have severe thyroid problem, all you got to do is take more iodine, right? So whenever you consume a goitrogen, if you're concerned about consuming a goitrogenic food, one is, if it's a vegetable, you can deactivate the goitrogen by steaming it. So say broccoli is a goitrogen, kale, and all those things. So you don't want to eat tons of it raw, but as soon as you steam it and cook it, you deactivate the goitrogen. And in the case of soy, I think the benefits far outweigh any potential risk. But if your thyroid's a bit sluggish, you just got to support the thyroid, which we'll go through into more depth, but generally using extra iodine will sort that problem. Okay, so the systems that we've covered today: digestive, intestinal, endocrine, your adrenals and your thyroid. And again, we look at how all these things connect with each other. Okay, and blood sugar balancing is really important as well. So got to get off all those carbs and sugars, because they're going to affect the sex hormone binding globulin, which will affect your estrogen levels. So just everything in a nutshell: probiotics, fermented food, fiber, no alcohol. Sort your yeast and bacteria and parasites and things with Quenda and other protocols available. Always take omega-3 no matter what is going on. Make sure you take enough levels of your omega-3, because that's just so important for every process in the body. Your milk thistle, Vitex is a herb, is chast tree, and I have done up a monograph. So a monograph is basically it's kind of like a profile of the nutrient or the drug or the herb. So I've done a monograph of the Vitex for you, and it tells you everything you need to know about Vitex: how it works, what it's used for, how to use it, etc. Again, as with all herbs, you can take it as a tincture or as a capsule or a powder, and that actually really helps to boost progesterone levels. So it helps balance estrogen by acting on the pituitary, which then promotes the production of progesterone. So that is a winner when it comes to estrogen dominance, and particularly menopause and perimenopause as well. Okay, supplements. There are loads of really wonderful supplements that have many of the nutrients that we mentioned already that will support the gut and the liver. So something like the Nutri Ultra, sorry, have I done that twice? Nutri Ultra, Nutri Clean. It's basically the Nutri Ultra Clean program. It's a detox program, metabolic detox program that is run by Nutri, and it helps to alkalize the body. It helps to support the liver, and it has a lot of nutrients that are liver friendly. You can also use what's called DIM and indole 3-carbinol, which is what I mentioned before. DIM is the broken down product of indole 3-carbinol. So some supplements will contain both DIM and indole 3-carbinol. Others contain only DIM or only indole 3-carbinol. In terms of general consensus, there's a lot of disagreement with regards to what should be used. Some nutritionists say, I'll rather use indole 3-carbinol because it's got so much more research than DIM, which is correct. And it's in the original form, which means that the body will then decide how to break that down. you know, if the body feels that it needs to convert it into lots of DIM, it will. If it feels like it doesn't, then it won't. And then there's also other factors which you know, we can go through at a later stage. So basically, my consensus is that it doesn't matter which one you use. You can try one and see how you get on. There are some supplements with a bit of both, which you can use, because if you can't break down the indole 3-carbinol, then you're not potentially going to get the benefit of the broken down product, the DIM. But the indole 3-carbinol is active on its own. It can support the liver on its own anyway, but the broken down product also does its own job. So it's kind of nice to have a bit of both. But you know, I think it's not really an issue. You pick one or the other and sort of get on with it, rather than spending too much time trying to decide what to do. Sprouted broccoli seed powder. In the health food stores, you can buy a bag of ground up broccoli seed powder. A teaspoon of this is the same as you eating a whole head of broccoli. So it's great to sprinkle on your soups, your stews. Again, add it to yogurt or any kind of you know, breakfast type stuff that you eat, like oats and things. So so that's really handy. And if you're fed up with chewing and eating lots of broccoli, just buy the sprouted broccoli seed powder, and it has loads of benefits. Okay. Sort the genetic. Like I said, don't have to do that first, because look at all the stuff you can do already. But would be great to check out the comp gene and do genetic testing. I have a £20 discount off my DNA Health genetic website testing for you. So when you're ready to do that, I can certainly give you the code for that. Okay, and what else is there we need to look at? I think we've talked a lot. Bearing in mind, although, I mean, a lot of clients I work with, honestly, they get incredibly fast results, you know, within 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, loads of testimonials. However, bearing in mind, it can take up to 2 years minimum for you to really start to balance your gut, your adrenal, your liver, sort out your hormones and things. So if you see an improvement, keep going, don't stop, keep going. You'll feel better. You will balance your body better and better as time goes by. But the result can be very quick. It can be as quick as a month, six weeks, 2 months. I mean, somebody from that I just consulted about 6 weeks, a month ago, around the same time we started the gut 5-day challenge, sent me a great big long email to say how thyroid's greatly improved, and there's just so much stuff going on, and there's all this autoimmunity and the graves and things. But so yeah, so no matter what's going on and how long you've had it, if you do it properly, you can get results really quickly. So even after the conditions have resolved, continue to focus and work on your stress level. Like I said before, it should be a long-term, lifelong mission, not a short-term thing just to fix a certain problem. And because it's a long-term thing, we don't really want to put our body through a lot of pain by eating food that we don't like, and you know, and doing these things. So at some point you got to think, what is it you like in terms of taste, smell, texture, and then find something that's going to work for you with a lot of the foods that we have already mentioned, or take it in a supplement form if you're not able to do it through your food. But the important thing is the sugar, is keeping your sugar intake low. And even if you go on a whole food diet and you're not going completely carb free or low carb, it's okay, as long as you're putting in all those extra nutrients and you're normalizing your blood sugar, you're exercising, you know, you're doing the far infrared. And so the body, there's many ways the body can heal. Doesn't have to be one way, doesn't have to be keto, doesn't have to be paleo, doesn't have to be vegan. In fact, there's a lot of very sick vegan people out there. Let's just not even talk about that right now. It's about giving your body what it needs. So if it's missing certain things, you give it what it needs, and then you can do other stuff on top of that, right? So it makes sense. You just correct the deficiency, and whatever else you do is just great. It's just on top of that. So if you want to eat vegan, that's absolutely fine, but you've got to put in the omega-3, you've got to put in the B-vits. You know, you got to put in certain things for the system, for your body to run properly, and then anything else you do is irrelevant, because that's your lifestyle choice. Okay, so a couple of supplements here that I picked up for you to see. So I mean, I'm not even going to tell you like, okay, these are the only supplements you need to take. because what I like to teach people is so that you can pick up any supplement on the product, on the market, and be able to discern for yourself whether it's something good or not to take. So I prefer to teach that than to tell you go and buy this, because in a year's time there could be 10 more amazing supplements on the market. So so firstly, it's okay to switch and change supplements. So you might want to take this for 2 months or 3 months and then change to something else. And it's a good idea because most supplements contain different nutrients, and when you switch it, you're giving your body a diversity of phytonutrients and stuff. So if you look at, this is one of the best ones they've got in America, which you can buy on iHerbs Australia, iHerb UK, and iHerb America. So it's got the calcium D-glucarate, which we mentioned, the indole 3-carbinol, which we mentioned, your green tea catechin, which is an antioxidant, your turmeric, which works on your liver and your gut, milk thistle, which I mentioned, rosemary is great for brain health and female hormone balancing, tomatoes, an antioxidant, your lycopene, so that's really great for men with prostate issues as well, if there's any blokes that want to take this. And then your broccoli seed powder, which I mentioned to you, and the sulforaphane, which is your sulfur product, which I mentioned is part of the sulfation, the sulfation pathway, your phase 2. So you can see something like this, you go, well, heck, that's a really good formula, I would take that, and that's definitely going to clear out the aggressive estrogen, and that formula can be used for any of those estrogen dominant type condition. And it doesn't have to be this supplement, but if you pick up another supplement that has maybe 3 or 4 of these things plus a bunch of other stuff that we mentioned already, at pretty decent doses you see here, then it's going to be good, isn't it? So bear that in mind, right, when you're looking at Nutrien. Now this one here is a very well-known UK-based company. I love them because they're 100% food state, and they use probiotics to ferment the food. So what they do is they feed friendly bacteria with and these yeast, like these Saccharomyces yeast, with food, and then they break down the food into nutrient. They then encapsulate the nutrient into the supplement, which is what you consume. So when you're taking food grade supplement, you're also getting the good bacteria in it. So this comes from, they use yellow pea to give you vitamin E. They even tell you where the vitamin E is coming from. You get vitamin B6. So these are your methylation, your B6, your minerals, your lactobacilli you got in there, is giving you magnesium. You've got iron, you've got zinc, methionine, amino acids, and then you've got down here, you see choline's very good for emulsifying bile, and it's very good for brain health. Indole 3-carbinol, again, you can't claim to have a good hormone balancing supplement if you're not using either DIM or indole 3-carbinol. You got milk thistle, you got your hydrochloric acid, which is betaine hydrochloride, that helps with gut health, and that's it. So so you could use something like that, and then you can, in addition to this, you can take maybe an antioxidant formula, or you could add glutathione, you could add NAC, or just a few other bits and bobs that you might want to throw in, or you could take a separate D-glucarate supplement in addition to this. So you see my point. Once you understand what you need, you can then look at a supplement and go, yeah, that's pretty much got 4 out of 10 that I need, and then I just got to get the remaining from food, or maybe 1 or 2 individual supplements. So we're going to go through more supplements to detox livers and things in the liver detox webinar, but I will give you the list of those nutrients before we start the detox, because ideally you should buy one of those to do the 21-day hormone detox, and if you don't, it's okay, but they're not that expensive. The Nutri Ultra Clear is a protein supplement with a huge raft of nutrients, like 20-30 nutrients that support the liver, the gut, and the adrenal, and that's about £50, I think, for a huge pot. So I'll make a list of all these things for you, and you can have a look. You can either start it now or start it when we do the detox. But I think it's really important that at some point in our life and on a regular period, we should all focus on the estrogen dominant, because if we keep the estrogen level balanced, we can really prevent cancer. And that was the crux of one of the seminars I went to a while back, when Dr. I've forgotten his name now, he was going on about how we should all be detoxing estrogen once a year, just like how we should be doing anti-parasite cleanse once a year, just to help normalize those estrogen, get those hormones in check, get the liver the gallbladder, and just get things back to baseline, get it revving. And it's like a car MOT, isn't it? You MOT your car once you have an oil change, and you change your filters and whatnot, change your cam belt, and the car runs really well. But unfortunately, with our own body, we don't see any symptoms until it's too late, until we get stage 3 cancer or whatever. So it's really important that we understand what's driving a lot of these conditions that we have, and then being able to do something about it on a kind of prophylactic level. Right, so I'm going to stop the screen share now. It's sort of like question time, and of course I'm always there to support you for question through the Facebook group and through the email. So if you have any question, please feel free to welcome Claire to ask. Yeah. Any questions? I'm gonna unmute.
Yes, but I don't know how. I can't find where to type them. My question is
under the chat box, Jane. I can hear you, so it's okay. I can hear you. Otherwise, you can. There's a little chat bubble, speech bubble at the bottom of the screen, so you can always type in there.
Oh, that one? No, that's my picture. It's not there. I'm on an iPad, so that's why I can't find it.
I think Kim said there should be three dots where you press on, but I can hear you anyway, so you can just ask your.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, my question is, because obviously I'm menopausal, so is my estrogen not rather low rather than high?
Not necessarily. You can actually have estrogen dominance even during your menopause. So it's about recognizing the symptoms. So if you have if you do that hormone questionnaire and under the estrogen dominant type section, if there's a lot of tick boxes there, then it could be, because we're talking about the ratio before. So in the menopause you have reduction of estrogen and progesterone, but if your ratio of estrogen is still high compared to progesterone, then you still are estrogen dominant. Does that make sense?
Yes, okay. Actually, when I did the questionnaire, and it was actually low, I came out as low estrogen. I had 5 checks on the low estrogen section.
Yeah, I mean
3 checks on the low cortisol, but 5 checks on the high cortisol.
Okay.
But low estrogen, it was 5 checks on the low estrogen.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that health questionnaire is really a baseline one. It's obviously not 100% accurate, but it fits in with the menopausal picture. So what I would suggest you do is make sure you do your flaxseed, your phytoestrogen, get the soys into your diet, the isoflavones, and maybe just take a menopausal support supplement that has a lot of these phytoestrogens, and yeah, so I would do that. But ideally, you want to look at down the route of bioidentical hormones or herbs that will increase levels of both progesterone and estrogen. So you might want to do Vitex agnus castus with some phytoestrogenic stuff through your food. So you might want to take some Vitex tincture and then just focus on the phytoestrogen through your diet, because you can get plenty of phytoestrogen. And that's what all the Asian women do, is their diet is very rich in legumes and these phytoestrogenic foods. I don't really feel there's much need to be taking estrogen supplement as such, because you can get a lot of it through your diet, the phytoestrogens through your diet.
So the Vitex agnus castus,
that will give you progesterone.
And then phytoestrogens in the diet.
Yeah, I think it's a good start. Or you can just start with the estrogen first, because if your questionnaire is showing clear deficiencies in estrogen, then just start with the phytoestrogenic foods. Start doing soy in your diet. You make sure you're getting your legumes and your flax seeds and all the things that we mentioned. And then you can always add the progesterone, because then at least you if there's any improvement in symptoms, you know that it's because you corrected the estrogen. Does that make sense? And then you can add the progesterone later on.
I've always had low progesterone. When I was to get pregnant, I had to take progesterone.
I mean, you're going to have low.
Although that was a long time ago now.
You're going to have low of both, but if you are showing more symptoms of low estrogen, you could just focus your energy on that first. The progesterone, you should add at some point anyway, irrespective, because it's really important to get the progesterone level up as well. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
Thank you.
you could ask your GP to run some tests just to get some baseline result if you'd like. Whether they mean anything or not is another story, but it's worthwhile. Yeah, it's just worthwhile getting some tests run to see if it can show anything.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? What supplements, herbs do you recommend for bone health and osteoporosis? So, herb-wise, there are many. What's that one that gives you a rash when you touch it?
Is that rosehip?
No, the stuff that stings you, stinging nettle, is really high in calcium. Oat straw, you can make oat straw, nettle, sorry, yeah, oat straw is really nice. You can make a tea with that. That's full of minerals and calcium. So I would focus on nettle. You can make nettle soup. You can buy dry nettle now, because now nettle is no longer in season, but for next year when it's in season, it's best to go out to pick them. Just bring some gloves, pick them, dry them, freeze them, and then use it in soup. You can make nettle soups. You can make nettle tincture. Actually, nettle tincture is really good for seasonal allergies and hay fever. So you can buy dry nettle and then just stick it in a jar, add 40% vodka, and let that sit for 6 weeks, and then strain it out and use the tincture if you suffer with hay fever, allergy, that sort of thing. But nettle to eat is really, really healthy. It's really good for your gut, your liver. It's got lots of minerals and iron and calcium and stuff. So I'd focus on those, but in terms of bone density and osteoporosis, it's really about the estrogen and the progesterone, particularly estrogen, because estrogen is what helps maintain bone density. So you've got to make sure that you are covered, that you've got high enough levels of estrogen to support your bones. This is where the bioidentical hormone comes in, or as I mentioned to Jane, support that through your diet with phytoestrogens and just estrogen rich foods. Yeah.
Can you explain what a bioidentical hormone is?
Yeah, so it's a cream or a pessary. Normally it's a cream that the doctors prescribe. So in the UK, there are a group of doctors who are trained to prescribe. It's prescription only, unfortunately, whereas in other places it may not be. So they're like the real stuff in the body. So during menopause and from menopause onwards, it's really important that us as women, that we use bioidentical hormones so that we can it's kind of like replacing your ovaries, like replacing what your ovaries doing is giving you the extra boost of progesterone and estrogen, because most of the problem that we have postmenopausal is linked to a lack of estrogen and progesterone. So it just makes sense to be able to put that back into our body in a very safe way, and doing that with bioidentical hormone and with a diet and nutrition, etc., etc., is the best way forward. Yeah.
That's not the same as HRT then?
No, it's completely different. HRT is synthetic. It's very powerful. It's one size fits all, whereas bioidentical is often prescribed to suit your requirements. So the doctors tend to run hormone testing and things, and they, in most places I know, they like in Australia, they manufacture to what you need. So they will send it off to a compounding lab and they'll say, well, this patient only needs X amount. Can you make a tube? And if they squeeze out an inch, it's going to deliver X amount. So it's actually tailored made, designed for you. And this is what Nicole Parker does with Dr. Coe and through the NAPRO technology doctors. They prescribe bioidentical progesterone, and that's how they help women with infertility, those who fail IVF, because they're able to prescribe any dose that is required to get that level well above into the therapeutic range. The Vitex is great, but you can't really control the dose because it's one size fits all. You know, the dose for most people would be a teaspoon 3 times a day of the Vitex tincture, and goodness knows how much progesterone that's going to stimulate in our body. Whereas when you're using bioidentical hormone, you are delivering that hormone exogenously into the body, but in a much more gentler way than the synthetic estrogen through the HRT. Yeah.
For ladies like myself I'm 8 years into the menopause now, and it's a natural process. So why should we really have to try and get back to fertility days when I'm no longer fertile? I mean,
it's not about fertility. You're not using that to try and get pregnant. You're using that to prevent bone loss, to prevent dementia, to prevent aging, because when we lose those hormones, we age exponentially. I mean, do you know what I mean? Like, you see women who look great in their 40 and suddenly in their 50 and 60, suddenly they become a grandma overnight because of that massive hormone drop. Whereas a lot of men you see, they tend to age quite well, I must admit. You see blokes aging really well. They look similar in their 50 to their 70, and yet women look drastically different from their 40s and 50 to when they're 70 if they don't look after themselves. So this is not about fertility. This is about heart health. When estrogen level drops, our risk of getting a heart attack it rises so significantly that it's the same as a bloke, as a male. Whereas when we before the menopause, because estrogen is protective for cardiovascular disease, the risk of a woman getting a heart attack is much smaller than a man. But you can imagine that actually increases to the same as a male when we hit menopause. So that's telling you how protective estrogen is. So estrogen is not toxic, it's extremely protective. It's only toxic when the aggressive form of estrogen keeps building up in the system and your liver's not clearing up properly. So when you have that imbalance, the estrogen dominance. But when you're talking about the menopause where everything's flat line, you've got to get that level up. And I have seen women aging very badly, without doing any of these things. And I've also seen women, in fact, there's a lady that looks after my family in Australia. She's actually a psychiatric nurse. She's in her mid 70, and she still works full time. She was looking after my dad when he had dementia in Australia, and she goes to the gym 3-4 times a week. She's really fit and feisty, and she said to me, Alina, I've been on bioidentical hormone ever since the menopause, because I was very lucky. I met a medical doctor in my gym who's also a bioidentical hormone expert, like a prescriber for bioidentical hormone, and he's been prescribing for me for all these years. And I'm just like, you know what, I'm not surprised, because you don't look like you've aged one bit. And I mean, I'm definitely going to be using that when I hit menopause, and certainly very focused on the hormone balancing using Vitex, and doing this estrogen detox thing, which we're going to do in the next couple of weeks. So I hope that answers your question, but yeah.
Thank you.
So, quick question then: do I need to detox estrogen if my estrogen is low?
Well, it's hard to know what is going on with your estrogen really without really understanding it. In terms of the detox, we are just supporting the liver, Dane. So don't forget that
that's all right.
The liver is also detoxing thousands of chemicals a day. So we're not doing the detox just to support estrogen. But if you do have high estrogen, your liver is going to be working much more efficiently, and it will do that naturally. Do you know what I mean?
And that's good for everything.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And a quick question about flax seeds. I have a spoonful of, dessert spoon of flax seeds every day. I will now increase that to 2. But should
one,
they be
you can do
whole?
1 to 2 is fine. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. Should they be ground or whole?
Ground is better because it releases the nutrients and stuff. Yeah.
I do grind them.
Yeah, grind them up for sure. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, you can make it into a protein ball. You can use some of my protein ball recipes and incorporate that into the protein ball. And don't forget to use chia seed as well, because that's also a really good source of fiber and omega-3 fats and things. So just
I chuck these things in our morning smoothie.
Yeah, I honestly, so many ways to make it, isn't there? That shouldn't really be a problem for a lot of people. It's just remembering to do it and understanding why it's so important to do it. Yeah.
Well, I make a morning smoothie and I chuck in all kinds of stuff, you know, flax seeds, chia seeds, vitamin C.
Yeah, I love the amla powder and the rosehip powder. They're just fantastic to use, and you can also use those to make like a nice face mask as well with those powders. Yeah. I'll give you guys some recipe and we'll have some fun making a lot of these things. Yeah, great. All right. Is there any other questions at all? Tina, you're a bit quiet. How you doing?
I think she's gone. I think there was a little message to say she had to hop off.
Oh, sorry, she does. Yeah, she's she's got.
That's why she's quiet. She's not here.
She's not there anymore. Okay. Well, yes. If there's no more question, we'll end the presentation now. And
thank you.
I'll catch up with you for part 2. I'm thinking next week I'm going to be working in a hospital for the entire week, so I've got all my evenings free, and I'm thinking of using one of the evenings to do the part 2 of the training. Okay, so we can fit 2 lectures in next week. One is part 2, and then one we move on to the next lecture. Yeah, otherwise we will never finish this training. So part 2, part 2 we'll go through maybe 3 or 4 estrogen dominant conditions and talk through the process of fixing and dealing with those. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Lena.
Speak soon. Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye, Claire. Bye, Tammy. Bye, Jane.
Everyone.
Bye.